The silver ships descended through Earth's atmosphere like falling stars, their hulls gleaming under the morning sun. Dr. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the observation deck window of the International Space Station, watching humanity's first confirmed contact with alien life unfold below. The three vessels, each roughly the size of a city block, settled gently into the designated landing zones outside Geneva, their arrival as silent as it was spectacular. Within hours, the world held its breath. Every news channel, every social media feed, every conversation centered on the same question. What did they want? The answer came swiftly. The beings that emerged from the ships were tall, graceful creatures with elongated limbs and skin that seemed to shift between silver and pale blue. They called themselves the Kithara, and they had come as representatives of something called the Galactic Collective. Their message, delivered through advanced translation technology, was both wonderful and terrifying in its simplicity. "We have been observing your species for some time," announced their lead envoy, a being who identified itself as Veltar. "The collective has determined that your world is ready for evaluation." The United Nations had hastily assembled a response team of diplomats, scientists, and military advisors. They gathered in a specially prepared facility, a sterile conference room that felt more like a laboratory than a meeting place for two civilizations. Secretary General Maria Santos led the human delegation, flanked by the brightest minds Earth could offer. Veltar and two other Kithara sat across from them, their large, dark eyes observing everything with what seemed like mild curiosity. The aliens moved with an almost liquid grace, their gestures flowing like water. When they spoke, their voices carried a musical quality that the translation devices couldn't quite capture. Evaluation, for what purpose? Dr. Chen had been selected as the primary scientific liaison, her years of xenobiology research suddenly becoming invaluable in ways she had never imagined. "To determine your species' potential contribution to the collective," Veltar replied, its head tilting in a way that might have been condescending on a human. "We have observed many worlds, Dr. Chen. Most prove limited in their value." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Secretary General Santos leaned forward, her diplomatic training keeping her voice steady. "And what determines this value? Advancement? Innovation? The ability to offer something meaningful to civilizations that have already mastered the basic sciences." Another Kithara, introduced as Nixara, gestured with one long finger. "Your species shows promise in some areas. Your music is quaint. Some of your literature demonstrates creativity, though primitive in execution." Dr. James Wilson, a physicist from CERN, couldn't help but interrupt. "Primitive? We've unlocked nuclear energy, mapped the human genome, sent probes to other planets." "Yes." Veltar's interruption was gentle, but firm. "Achievements that most species accomplish within their first 1,000 years of technological development. The collective has member races that consider your current level of advancement to be roughly equivalent to their ancient history." The room fell silent. The implications were staggering. Humanity, for all its pride in scientific achievement, was apparently barely past infancy in galactic terms. "However," Nixara continued, "we are not entirely dismissive. Your species shows unusual persistence. This quality, while not particularly valuable for advanced scientific pursuits, has some merit for basic labor functions within the collective." Labor functions? The question came from General Morrison, the senior military advisor present. His weathered face showed the first signs of the anger that many in the room were feeling. "Manual tasks, resource extraction, simple manufacturing under supervision." The third Kithara, silent until now, spoke with what the humans were beginning to recognize as the aliens' version of mild enthusiasm. Many successful collective species began with such roles, Over several millennia, some have advanced to more significant positions. Dr. Chen felt her heart sink. She had spent her career dreaming of this moment, imagining first contact as humanity's entrance into a larger community of intelligent beings. Instead, they were being offered the cosmic equivalent of an entry-level job that might, possibly, lead to something better in a few thousand years. "You seem disappointed," Veltar observed, its large eyes studying the human faces around the table. "This is a common reaction among newly contacted species. You have been, as you say, big fish in a small pond. The reality of galactic civilization often comes as a shock." Secretary General Santos found her voice again. "What if we're not interested in joining your collective under these terms?" "That is, of course, your choice," Nixara replied, with something that might have been a shrug. "We will note your world's location and status in our records. Perhaps in another few millennia, when you have developed further, you might be ready for a more meaningful role." The implication was clear. Accept the offered position, or be left behind entirely. General Morrison had remained quiet throughout most of the exchange, but now he leaned back in his chair, studying the aliens with the same intensity they had been showing the humans. There was something in his expression that Dr. Chen couldn't quite read. A look she had seen before in soldiers who were processing new intelligence. "Tell me," Morrison said finally, his voice casual in a way that immediately put everyone else on edge. "In all your travels, all the civilizations you've encountered and evaluated, how do you handle disagreements between species in your collective?" Veltar's head tilted again. "Disagreements are rare. The collective operates on principles of logic and mutual benefit. When all needs are met through cooperation, conflict becomes unnecessary. But what about when logic isn't enough? When two species want the same resource or have incompatible goals? Such situations are resolved through mediation by the collective council. The decision is made based on optimal resource allocation and the greatest benefit to the whole." Morrison nodded slowly. "And if a species refuses to accept that decision?" For the first time since the meeting began, the three Cathera exchanged glances. Dr. Chen caught the subtle shift in their posture, a slight stiffening that suggested the general had touched on something significant. "Such instances are extremely rare," Veltar said finally. "The benefits of cooperation are self-evident to any rational species." "But not unknown," Morrison pressed. "In the few cases where a species has proven unable to integrate with collective principles, appropriate measures have been taken." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Dr. Chen found herself holding her breath, suddenly understanding the direction of Morrison's questions. "What kind of measures?" Nixara made a gesture that the humans were learning indicated mild discomfort. "Perhaps we should focus on more positive aspects of potential membership." "What kind of measures?" Morrison repeated, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to getting answers to difficult questions. Veltar's large eyes studied the general for a long moment before responding. "Isolation, economic restrictions. In extreme cases, technological limitations may be imposed. And if a species resists these limitations?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Dr. Chen felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that humanity's first contact with galactic civilization had just revealed something far more ominous than simple technological inferiority. They had met their neighbors, and those neighbors had rules, enforced rules. Morrison leaned forward slightly, his weathered hands folded on the table. "I think there's something you should know about humans," he said quietly. "Something that might not be in your observations." The three Kithara waited, their alien features unreadable, but their attention focused entirely on the human general. Around the table, the rest of the human delegation held their breath, sensing that the course of first contact was about to change in ways none of them had anticipated. General Morrison's words hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. The three Kythera representatives sat motionless, their large, dark eyes fixed on the weathered human soldier who had just suggested he knew something they didn't. In all their travels across the galaxy, encountering dozens of species, such confidence from a technologically inferior race was unprecedented. What we should know. Veltar's melodic voice carried a note of what might have been amusement. General Morrison, is it? We have observed your species for over 2 of your decades. Our monitoring systems have recorded your technological progress, your social structures, your cultural developments. What could you possibly tell us that our advanced surveillance has missed? Morrison's smile was thin and cold, the expression of someone who had seen too much and survived worse. Your surveillance is impressive, I'm sure. But observation from a distance only tells you so much. You see the surface of what we are, not what we're capable of becoming when pushed. Dr. Chen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She had worked with military liaisons before, but Morrison was different. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had faced death and emerged victorious. Now, facing beings from the stars, he showed no more concern than he might have shown meeting with foreign dignitaries. General, Secretary General Santos interjected carefully, perhaps we should focus on establishing positive relations? No, Maria. Morrison's interruption was respectful but firm. They've made their position clear. We're barely evolved primates who might be useful for manual labor in a few thousand years. But they're missing something crucial about human nature. Nixara leaned forward, its elongated form moving with that characteristic liquid grace. And what might that be, General Morrison? You mentioned that disagreements in your collective are resolved through mediation and logic. That resistant species face isolation, economic restrictions, and technological limitations. You said that in extreme cases, appropriate measures are taken. Morrison paused, his gray eyes studying each alien face. What you haven't mentioned is war. The word fell into the room like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples that reached every corner. The Kythera exchanged glances again, and Dr. Chen caught something new in their expressions. Not amusement this time, but what might have been confusion. War? Veltar's translation device seemed to struggle with the concept. You mean organized conflict between groups? We are aware of such primitive behaviors. Most species abandon such practices once they achieve basic technological sophistication. Morrison chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. You think war is primitive? That's your first mistake. War isn't primitive, it's evolutionary. It's not something we abandoned when we became advanced. It's what made us advanced. The alien's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. For the first time since the meeting began, they seemed truly focused on what a human was saying. You want to know what your surveillance missed? Morrison continued, rising from his chair and walking to the large display screen that dominated one wall of the conference room. Let me tell you about human history. With quick, efficient movements, he called up a world map, the familiar continents appearing in blue and green. Red dots began to appear across the surface, thousands of them, spreading like a disease. Each red dot represents a major military conflict in human history. Notice something? Morrison gestured at the screen. They never stop. From the moment we learned to pick up rocks and hit each other with them, we've been at war. Not occasionally, not as a last resort, but constantly. The display shifted, showing timelines, casualty figures, technological developments born from military necessity. The Kythera stared at the screen with what could only be described as fascination. The Punic Wars, Morrison continued, his voice taking on the cadence of a lecture. Rome and Carthage fought for over a century. The Mongols conquered the largest contiguous land empire in history. The 30 Years' War killed a third of Central Europe. World War I. We called it the Great War because we thought it was too terrible to ever happen again. We were wrong. The display showed images of trenches, poison gas, machine gun nests. Dr. Chen had seen these pictures before, but in this context, with alien observers, they took on a horrifying new significance. World War II, Morrison pressed on relentlessly. 60 million dead. We developed weapons that could level cities in seconds. Not content with killing each other efficiently, we industrialized it. Gas chambers, bombing campaigns, submarine warfare. We turned murder into a science. Veltar's voice was quieter now, less confident. But surely once you achieved spaceflight, once you saw your world from beyond... Korea, Vietnam, the Cold War, where we spent 40 years ready to destroy our entire planet rather than back down. The Gulf War, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Ukraine. Morrison's finger stabbed at the screen with each conflict. We never stopped. Even when we reached for the stars, we were still fighting. The room had grown completely silent, except for Morrison's voice and the soft hum of the translation devices working overtime to convey concepts the aliens clearly struggled to understand. You want to know why humans are different? Morrison turned back to face the Cathera, his expression deadly serious. Every other species you've encountered learned to resolve conflicts through logic and mediation because they were smart enough to stop fighting. Humans are different. We learned to resolve conflicts by becoming so good at fighting that surrender became the logical choice. Nixara made a gesture that might have been protest. But the casualties, the destruction, surely such losses would discourage us? They made us stronger. Morrison pulled up new images, field hospitals, military engineers, combat medics working under fire. Every war taught us something new. How to save lives under impossible conditions, how to coordinate massive logistical operations, how to adapt, improvise, overcome. The display shifted again, showing technological innovations. Radar, computers, the internet, GPS, medical advances, materials science breakthroughs. All traced back to military research and development. You see primitive behavior, Morrison continued. We see the greatest teacher in human history. War didn't hold us back. It drove us forward. It forced us to be better, faster, smarter. It taught us to work together under pressure, to sacrifice for others, to never give up no matter how hopeless the situation seemed. Dr. Chen found herself looking at the aliens with new eyes. Their graceful movements, their musical voices, their apparent confusion at the concept of sustained warfare. They were beautiful, advanced, logical. They were also soft. Your collective resolves disputes through mediation, Morrison said, returning to his seat but maintaining eye contact with Veltar. What happens when you encounter a species that doesn't want to mediate? What happens when you meet someone who would rather fight than submit? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The three Kithara sat in silence for several long moments, and Dr. Chen could almost see them processing this new information, trying to fit it into their understanding of galactic civilization. You are suggesting, Veltar said finally, that humans would resist collective authority through violence? Morrison's smile returned, cold and sharp. I'm suggesting that humans have been preparing for that possibility our entire existence, whether we knew it or not. Every generation has faced someone stronger, someone with better technology, someone who thought we should submit. And every generation has found a way to win anyway. The general leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed now, as if he had just delivered a weather report rather than a threat to galactic order. You mentioned appropriate measures for species that resist technological limitations. I'm curious, have you ever tried to impose those measures on a species that considers warfare an art form? The silence that followed was different from the earlier pauses. This wasn't the comfortable quiet of superiority, but the tense stillness of predators suddenly realizing they might not be at the top of the food chain after all. Nixara was the first to speak, its voice carefully controlled. "General Morrison, are you threatening the collective?" Morrison's laugh was genuinely amused this time. "Threatening? No, I'm just sharing information you seem to lack. You asked what your surveillance missed. The answer is simple. You missed the fact that humans don't just fight wars. We are war. It's written into our DNA, carved into our bones, burned into our souls." He gestured at his fellow humans around the table. "Every person in this room is descended from warriors. Not because we chose violence, but because the ones who couldn't or wouldn't fight didn't survive long enough to have children. For millions of years, natural selection on Earth had one primary criterion: the ability to kill or be killed." The implications of his words were sinking in, and Dr. Chen could see the aliens processing them with something approaching alarm. They had come to evaluate a species they considered technologically inferior, only to discover something far more dangerous than advanced science, a race that had spent its entire evolutionary history perfecting the art of conflict. Morrison stood again, straightening his uniform with practiced efficiency. "So let me ask you a question, Veltar. In all your observations of human civilization, in all your advanced surveillance, did you ever wonder why a species barely past nuclear technology had weapons capable of destroying their own planet? Did you ever ask yourselves why we built them, kept them, and pointed them at each other for decades without using them?" The Kithara remained silent. "It wasn't fear that stopped us," Morrison said quietly. "It was strategy. We were waiting to see what came next." The silence that followed Morrison's final words stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Dr. Chen watched the three Kithara representatives, noting how their graceful postures had subtly shifted. The casual confidence they had displayed throughout the meeting was gone, replaced by something she had never expected to see in beings so technologically advanced: uncertainty. Veltar was the first to break the silence, its melodic voice carrying a new note of caution. "General Morrison, you speak of strategy as if you were expecting our arrival." Morrison's weathered face cracked into a grin that held no warmth. "Not your arrival specifically, but something like it. Humanity has always known we weren't alone in the universe. The math made that clear centuries ago. What we didn't know was whether our neighbors would be friendly." He paused, studying each alien face in turn. "Now we do." The third Kithara, who had remained largely silent throughout the meeting, suddenly straightened, its large, dark eyes fixed on Morrison with an intensity that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "You anticipated first contact would be hostile?" "I anticipated it would be exactly like this," Morrison replied calmly. "Advanced beings arriving to tell us we're inferior, offering us the chance to serve them in exchange for their wisdom. It's the oldest story in human history, just on a bigger scale." Dr. Chen felt a chill run down her spine as she began to understand the direction of Morrison's thoughts. The general wasn't just challenging the aliens' assumptions about humanity. He was revealing a fundamental truth about human nature that even she hadn't fully grasped. Nixara leaned forward, its silver-blue skin seeming to shift color with agitation. "If you believed contact would be hostile, why did you not attack when our ships arrived?" Morrison's laugh was soft and deadly. "Because that would be primitive thinking. You don't attack when someone comes to your door. You invite them in, offer them a drink, and find out what they want. You learn their capabilities, their weaknesses, their intentions. Then, if necessary, you destroy them." The words hung in the air like a blade. Secretary General Santos shifted uncomfortably. Clearly torn between diplomatic protocol and the growing realization that Morrison might be humanity's best hope for surviving this encounter. General, Dr. Chen interjected, her scientist's mind racing to process the implications, what exactly are you suggesting? Morrison turned to her, his expression almost paternal. Dr. Chen, you've spent your career studying the possibility of alien life. Tell me, in all your theoretical scenarios, how many involved aliens arriving to offer humanity equal partnership? The question hit her like a physical blow. In truth, almost every serious xenobiological theory assumed that any species capable of interstellar travel would be so far advanced that humanity would be, at best, a curiosity. The idea of true equality had always been a romantic fantasy. None, she admitted quietly. Exactly. Which means we've been preparing for this conversation our entire existence, whether we knew it or not. Morrison returned his attention to the aliens. You want to know what your surveillance missed? It missed the fact that humans have spent the last century preparing for total war on a scale you can't imagine. The display screen flickered to life again, showing images that made even Dr. Chen's stomach turn. Nuclear silos, submarine fleets, orbital weapons platforms that officially didn't exist, biological research facilities hidden in innocuous buildings across the globe. You see a species barely past nuclear technology, Morrison continued, his voice taking on the professional tone of a military briefing. What you missed is that we've weaponized everything we've discovered. Nuclear weapons were just the beginning. The screen showed technical diagrams, casualty projections, strategic maps that revealed the true scope of human military preparation. The Cathara stared at the display with growing alarm. Biological weapons that target specific genetic markers. Quantum computers designed to crack any encryption in real time. Nanotechnology that can disassemble matter at the molecular level. And yes, we have ways to deliver all of this beyond our atmosphere. Veltar's composure finally cracked. You are threatening the collective. This is evolution. Morrison cut it off sharply. You think war made us primitive? War made us creative. Every weapon we've ever built came from someone asking a simple question. How do we kill something that's trying to kill us? The answer has driven every major technological advance in human history. Dr. Chen found herself staring at Morrison with a mixture of horror and admiration. The man she had thought was simply a military advisor was revealing himself to be something far more dangerous, a strategic thinker who had spent his entire career preparing for this exact moment. You mentioned isolation, economic restrictions, technological limitations, Morrison continued, now pacing around the table like a predator circling prey. Let me tell you what happens when you try to impose those measures on humanity. The screen changed again, showing Earth's industrial capacity, resource distribution, population centers. But now the data was overlaid with military assets, defensive positions, and what were clearly contingency plans for global warfare. Isolation? We've been isolated for our entire existence. It made us self-reliant. Economic restrictions? We've survived ice ages, plagues, and the collapse of civilizations. We know how to make do with nothing. Technological limitations? Morrison's smile was razor-sharp. Good luck with that. Nixara made a gesture that the translation devices couldn't quite interpret, but the meaning was clear. Distress. You cannot seriously believe you could resist the combined might of the collective. We represent thousands of worlds. Technologies beyond your comprehension. Technologies developed by species who gave up warfare, Morrison interrupted. Species who learned to resolve conflicts through mediation and logic. Tell me, when was the last time any of your member races fought a war? Not a skirmish, not a police action, but a real war where the survival of their entire species was at stake? The question caught all three aliens off guard. They exchanged glances, and Dr. Chen could see them struggling to find an answer. That's what I thought, Morrison said quietly. You've created a peaceful civilization by excluding everyone who knows how to fight, which means you've forgotten how to defend yourselves against someone who hasn't. The implications of his words were staggering. The Galactic Collective, for all its advanced technology and vast resources, might be fundamentally vulnerable to a species that had never stopped preparing for war. "This is madness," Veltar said, its musical voice strained. "You speak as if conflict is inevitable. The Collective has maintained peace for millennia through cooperation and shared prosperity." Morrison stopped pacing and faced the alien directly. "Peace through strength or peace through weakness? Because there's a difference. You've achieved peace by creating a community of sheep. But what happens when the wolves find you?" Dr. Chen suddenly understood what Morrison was really saying. Humanity wasn't just resistant to the Collective's authority. They were potentially the greatest threat the Collective had ever faced, not because of superior technology, but because of superior adaptability to conflict. "You're suggesting," she said slowly, "that human integration into the Collective would destabilize their entire civilization?" "I'm suggesting that human integration would be the best thing that ever happened to them," Morrison replied, "if they're smart enough to recognize it." The general turned back to the aliens, his expression serious. "You came here expecting to find another species to add to your collection. What you found instead is something you didn't know you needed, a guardian race." He gestured at the screen, which now showed Earth's defensive capabilities alongside projections of what human military technology could become with access to galactic resources. Every peaceful civilization in history has faced the same problem eventually. Someone comes along who doesn't want to talk, doesn't want to mediate, doesn't want anything except to take what you have. When that happens, logic and cooperation become liabilities. Nixara's voice was barely above a whisper. "What are you proposing?" Morrison's smile was genuine for the first time since the meeting began. "Partnership. Real partnership. You give us access to your technology, your resources, your knowledge. In exchange, we give you the one thing your peaceful civilization can't provide for itself, the ability to sleep safely at night." The room fell silent again as the full weight of the proposal sank in. The aliens had come to offer humanity a subservient role in their grand civilization. Instead, they had discovered a species offering to become their protectors. "You see," Morrison continued, "evolution never stops. Your collective represents the pinnacle of peaceful development. But peace is only sustainable as long as everyone agrees to it. Humanity represents something else, the ultimate backup plan." Veltar sat motionless for several long moments, processing information that clearly challenged everything the collective thought they knew about galactic civilization. When it finally spoke, its voice carried a new note of respect. "General Morrison, if we were to consider such a partnership, what assurances could you offer that humanity would not simply become the threat we seek to defend against?" Morrison's answer was immediate and certain. "Because we've already had that opportunity, and we chose not to take it. For 70 years, we've possessed the ability to destroy our own world. We could have used those weapons to conquer each other, but we didn't. We could have used them first when you arrived, but we didn't. We're not looking for conquest. We're looking for purpose." The general walked back to his seat and sat down, his posture relaxed but alert. "The question isn't whether humanity will destabilize your collective. The question is whether you're wise enough to let us stabilize it instead." Dr. Chen looked around the room, seeing her own thoughts reflected in the faces of her colleagues. In the space of an hour, humanity's role in the galaxy had shifted from potential servants to potential saviors. The aliens had come to evaluate humanity's worth, only to discover that the evaluation was working both ways. The Cathara huddled together in quiet, musical conversation, their translation devices picking up only fragments. Words like unprecedented and recalibration and council emergency filtered through. When they finally turned back to the human delegation, Veltar's entire demeanor had changed. The casual superiority was gone, replaced by something approaching diplomatic equality. "General Morrison," it said carefully, "the collective will need to consider this new information very thoroughly. This conversation has revealed perspectives we had not anticipated." Morrison nodded. "Take all the time you need. We've been waiting for neighbors for thousands of years. We can wait a little longer to find out if we're getting friends or enemies." As the meeting adjourned and the aliens filed out, Dr. Chen caught Morrison's arm. "General, did you just threaten the most advanced civilization in the galaxy?" Morrison's grin was boyish and terrifying in equal measure. "Dr. Chen, I just offered them the best deal they'll ever get. Whether they're smart enough to take it remains to be seen." Outside the conference room windows, the three alien ships sat silently in their landing zones, no longer symbols of humanity's insignificance, but evidence that the galaxy had just become a much more interesting place.